My name is Zara Beaumont, and 3 years ago, the man waiting behind those doors
The
divorced me
Korean
because
Mafia
of a bet.
Boss divorced me on a bet. He didn't know the empire. I built, controlled his future. My name is Zara Beaumont. And 3 years ago, the man waiting behind those doors divorced me because of a bet. He had come to ask for 90 more days before my company removed his family from the building that kept their legitimate empire alive. He did not know I was the person who would decide whether he got them. He thought 3 years was enough time to erase me. It was not enough. It was exactly enough time for me to rebuild a dying company into the empire that now controlled his future. The Korean Mafia Boss divorced me on a bet. He didn't know the empire. I built, controlled his future. Let me take you back to before the boardroom, before the tower, before the magazine covers and the gold letters and the people who suddenly remembered how to pronounce Beaumont correctly. I was 27 years old. I had been married to Shin Jun-ho for 2 years, and I gave those 2 years everything I knew how to give. At his family dinners, I was introduced as the woman he met at the restaurant, as though the location where our lives crossed was the most important thing about me. I walked into rooms where people silently calculated how much I did not belong. I smiled. I kept my shoulders straight. I told myself love was bigger than every room that required me to prove it. Shin Jun-ho was not a regular man. If you knew the Shin name in our city, you knew enough not to ask careless questions. His family owned restaurants, warehouses, commercial buildings, and import companies. Those were the businesses listed on paper. Beneath them ran an older network, favours, protection agreements, routes through the harbour, debts collected without courtrooms, and alliances maintained by men who never appeared in photographs. Jun-ho had inherited the network at 32 after his father suffered a stroke. He was the youngest man ever to sit at the head of the Shin Council, and the most controlled. He did not shout. He did not need to. He entered a room and the room adjusted to him, strong jaw, slicked back dark hair, a thin scar near one eyebrow, ink covering one hand and climbing the side of his neck beneath his collar. He watched people with dark, unreadable eyes that made them reveal more than they intended. And me, a black woman from the South Side working double shifts while paying the final bills from my grandfather's illness, was the woman he said he would never stop choosing. I believed him. Loving him fully was not my mistake. Believing his love had no fine print was. The fine print revealed itself slowly. His mother, Mrs. Shin, looked at my hands whenever I helped set a family table. Not my eyes, not my face, my hands. She believed hands told you where a woman came from, and mine carried small calluses from years of trays, plates, and hot coffee pots. His associates asked what I did, then lost interest when I said waitress. His aunt once complimented my English even though I had been born 12 miles from where she was standing. A council elder asked Jun-ho in Korean whether he planned to educate me before bringing me to more private events. He did not know I had spent 6 months learning enough Korean to understand him. Jun-ho answered sharply and ended the conversation. That night he held me closer than usual. But later, when I asked what the council was discussing, he said, "You do not need to carry that world." At first it sounded protective. Over time I understood what it also meant. You do not need to know. You do not need to decide. You do not need to become larger than the place I made for you. When he was tired or angry, he sometimes said, "You do not understand how power works," as though I had never managed an entire restaurant floor while wealthy people demanded impossible things and expected me to smile while solving them, as though intelligence only counted when it wore a suit and sat at his table. He loved me. I genuinely believe that even now. But he loved a version of me he had decided was complete, warm, capable, loyal, present, and safely outside the rooms where consequences were decided. He loved me as long as I remained the size he had first discovered. He never wrote that condition down. He never said it aloud. But it existed in every "you would not understand," every closed-door conversation, every glance from his mother, and every decision made for me instead of with me. I signed that fine print for 2 years without realizing there was a contract. That was the hardest part. There had been something real between us. The first year, he waited outside the restaurant until my shifts ended, even when meetings ran late. He learned how I took my coffee. He replaced the broken lock on my grandfather's apartment himself because I did not trust the landlord. When I woke from bad dreams after the funeral, he never asked me to stop crying. He simply turned on the lamp and stayed awake beside me until morning. Love can be real and still be immature. A man can adore you and still believe somewhere inside himself that your life should orbit his. The night of Kim Dae-woo's birthday party, I was working a double. Bills do not care about birthday parties. Jun-ho went alone. The gathering took place in the private upper floor of a shin-owned lounge, no phones at the table, security at the elevator. 12 people who had known each other since childhood and had spent their entire lives mistaking access for invincibility. Somewhere between the third bottle of premium soju and the laughter of Yeonji-soo, Junho's childhood friend, his mother's preferred match, and the woman who had been waiting years for our marriage to become temporary, somebody suggested truth or dare. I learned what happened from Park Yoon-jae, Junho's right-hand man. Eun-jae had always treated me with quiet respect. Months later, when he finally told me the truth, he could not hold my gaze. Jisoo lost a round. Instead of accepting a dare, she proposed one. Divorce the waitress for 90 days, she told Junho. If she fights for you, she is really yours. If she disappears, then she only loved the security. People laughed. Someone put money on the table. Another man said I would call within a week. Jisoo said 10 days. Junho should have stood up. He should have ended the game. He should have made every person at that table understand that my name was not entertainment. Instead, he laughed. Then he accepted the bet. That is the betrayal at the center of this story. Not another woman in his bed. Not a marriage that died slowly. A game. My life was placed on a table beside bottles and money because wealthy, protected people were bored enough to test whether I could be discarded and retrieved on schedule. He came home at 2 a.m. I was still in my uniform, feet resting on the edge of the couch, eating leftover soup and watching a show I had seen twice because familiar things felt safe after a long shift. He removed his coat slowly. His right hand was bruised from something he never explained. He sat across from me at the kitchen table we had bought second-hand on Mercer Street. A heavy oak table we carried up 3 flights of stairs together while laughing so hard we nearly dropped it. "I want a divorce," he said. No argument led there, no warning, no expression on his face I recognized as honest. I put down my spoon. "Is there someone else?" "No." "Did I do something?" "No." "Then why?" He looked at the table instead of me. "Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe you need space to decide what you really want." He sounded calm, reasonable, rehearsed. I know now what that calm meant. It was the calm of a man who did not believe he was risking anything permanent. He was conducting an experiment. He expected tears, arguments, and desperate calls. He believed he could let me suffer for 10 days, maybe 30, possibly 60, then arrive in a black car, open the door and collect me from exactly where he had left me. He thought he was the load-bearing wall of my life. He did not account for what I would discover when the wall moved and the ceiling remained standing. "Is this final?" I asked. His eyes lifted to mine. For 1 second, something uncertain passed through them. "Yes," he said. That single word ended the version of me that still believed love excused disrespect. I did not plead. I did not throw anything. I did not call his mother, his friends, or Yoon-jae. I signed the divorce papers 3 days later. Junho's attorney stared at me twice, as if he had been warned to expect a scene. I read every page. I declined the apartment, the car, and the settlement his family offered. I kept only what belonged to me: my clothes, my grandfather's watch, $1,900 in savings, and a phone number I had ignored for months. Wallace Bennett, my grandfather's former business partner. He had called 6 times since my 27th birthday. Each message was careful and frustratingly vague. Ms. Beaumont, there is a private estate matter requiring your personal authorization. He never mentioned money. He never mentioned a company. He could not. My grandfather had placed strict confidentiality terms around the trust after former partners tried to seize his assets during his final illness. Until I appeared in person with identification and requested the sealed review, Wallace was legally permitted to say almost nothing. Junho disliked calls he could not investigate. He once asked Unjae to run Wallace's name, found no immediate threat, and told me it was probably an estate salesman searching for fees. I accepted his judgment because I had spent 2 years treating his certainty as a substitute for my own curiosity. The morning after the divorce became final, I called Wallace back. The call lasted less than an hour. The meeting the next morning lasted 4. By the end of it, I understood 3 things. First, my grandfather, James Beaumont, had not died penniless. He had allowed most people to believe that because public weakness protected his remaining assets from a lawsuit engineered by men who wanted his company cheap. Second, Beaumont Capital Enterprises still existed inside a private trust, and I was its controlling heir. Third, it was not an empire. Not yet. The company held $18 million in aging commercial property, $29 million in debt, 2 buildings with occupancy below 40%, 1 unresolved environmental claim, and a lender preparing to force liquidation within 6 months. On paper, the assets sounded impressive. In reality, Beaumont Capital was a wounded animal hiding in a locked room. My grandfather had protected the name. He had not left me a finished kingdom. He had left me a foundation, a warning, and a deadline. Wallace pushed a thick folder across the table. If you decline control, he said, the trust will sell the remaining properties, pay the creditors, and close the company. You might receive a modest distribution afterward. How modest? After fees and liabilities? Perhaps $60,000. $60,000 would have changed my life then. It would have paid every bill, bought time, and given me enough safety to breathe. I looked down at the folder. On the first page was a photograph of my grandfather standing in front of the company's first property, a narrow brick building with boarded windows and Beaumont painted by hand across a temporary sign. He was younger than I remembered, proud, tired, certain. What happens if I accept control? I asked. Wallace's eyes held mine. You inherit the debt, the litigation, the lender deadline, and every decision nobody else wants to make. Do you think it can survive? I think it can, he said. I do not know whether you can save it. It was the first honest thing anyone had said to me in days. I signed, not because I suddenly understood private equity. Not because I knew how to rescue distressed commercial assets. I signed because 3 days earlier, a man who claimed to love me had looked into my face and gambled that I would choose humiliation over uncertainty as long as humiliation kept me near him. For the first time in years, uncertainty looked like freedom. That evening, I returned to the small apartment and spread the company files across the floor because I did not own a desk. I understood almost none of them. Debt covenants, occupancy ratios, capital calls, environmental reserves, preferred returns. I wrote unfamiliar terms in a notebook and looked them up one by one. I watched lectures until sunrise. I built spreadsheets badly, then rebuilt them. I called Wallace the next morning with 14 pages of questions. He answered every one. On day 10, the day Jisoo had predicted I would beg for my husband back, I met the lender preparing to liquidate Beaumont Capital. The meeting took place in a glass office, 40 floors above the city. 3 men sat across from me. One glanced at my file, then at Wallace, assuming he was in charge. I corrected him once. By the end of the meeting, I had negotiated a 90-day standstill in exchange for weekly reporting, the sale of 1 non-core property, and a personal guarantee against the small distribution I would otherwise have received. I walked out with no safety net and 90 days to prove I could keep the company alive. There was something almost poetic about that number. Junho expected 90 days to reveal that I could not live without him. I used those same 90 days to begin rebuilding the company that would one day control the building his family could not operate without. I did not call him. Not on day 30 when Eun-jae sent a careful message saying Junho was checking whether I needed anything. Not on day 41, when a black sedan remained across the street from my apartment for 3 hours and disappeared the moment I approached it. Not on day 60, when Jisoo texted, "Heard you and June parted ways. Hope you are doing okay out there, sweetie." That word stayed with me. Sweetie. 2 syllables. Light, polished condescension from a woman certain she had won. I printed the message and taped it above the second-hand desk I bought the next week. Not because it wounded me, because it was free fuel. Karma does not work according to your preferred schedule, but you can work while it is moving. You can build while people are waiting for you to collapse. You can turn 90 days of expected begging into the first quarter of a future nobody bothered to calculate. So I worked. Wallace taught me the history of every property. I hired Marcus Reed, a former restructuring executive known for walking into dying companies and identifying the one thing still worth saving. He interviewed me for 40 minutes before agreeing to become CFO. "What is your experience?" I asked. Kane asked. "Restaurants, crisis management, reading people before they tell me what they need, working 16 hours without losing track of details, and 10 days of corporate finance." That last part concerns me. It should. Why should I risk my reputation on you? Because everyone else sees a company already dead. I see 12 months of decisions nobody has made correctly yet. He studied me for a long moment, then he smiled once. Good answer. Together we sold a vacant warehouse before the lender could seize it. We used the proceeds to settle the environmental claim and renovate the ground floors of 2 half-empty buildings. Instead of chasing luxury tenants, we offered long leases to black-owned medical practices, legal offices, designers and technology firms priced out of the central district. Occupancy rose from 38% to 72% in 7 months. We restructured the senior debt. We bought back one note at a discount. We converted an abandoned loading facility into flexible commercial studios. Every major firm had ignored that side of town because they were studying old maps. I knew the neighborhood because I had taken buses through it since I was 16. I knew where foot traffic was changing. I knew which streets felt different after 6 in the evening. I knew people who had never been invited into investment meetings but understood the city block by block. The knowledge Junho's world dismissed as small became the advantage that saved Beaumont Capital. By the end of the first year, the company's debt had fallen by $9 million and operating revenue had nearly doubled. By the end of the second year, our portfolio was valued above $112 million. By the middle of year 3, after acquiring and renovating a 12-story tower in the financial district, Beaumont Capital Enterprises crossed $240 million in total holdings. That number was not waiting for me in a sealed envelope. We built it, deal by deal, lease by lease, night by night. The transformation did not feel clean from inside it. There were nights I sat alone at my desk until 2 in the morning, reading documents I had never been trained to understand. There were attorneys who spoke quickly because they assumed confusion would make me agree. There were investors who addressed Marcus after I asked the question. There were meetings where I watched the familiar calculation pass through someone's eyes when I entered. Black woman, young, unknown. And felt them lower their expectations before I opened my mouth. Every time I had a choice, shrink to match the size they had prepared for, or stay exactly where I was, and force them to adjust. I made them adjust, not effortlessly, not without fear. I did it because I remembered the Mercer Street table, the white carnation, the word final, the 90 days that were supposed to break me. I decided none of those things would become the last sentence written about who I was. During our first year, Wallace recommended Yon Advisory Group for a short-term valuation contract. They had reviewed several Beaumont properties years earlier for my grandfather and already possessed archived building records. We hired them for 6 weeks under a strict confidentiality agreement. Their work was competent. Their access ended. The relationship closed. I never knew Jisoo personally supervised the archive division. I never knew she noticed my name on the engagement file, and I never knew she quietly copied material she had no right to keep. Internal valuation models, acquisition targets, and financing assumptions that would become dangerous in the wrong hands. Not until the gala. The tower we acquired in year 3 had once belonged to a pension fund. It was outdated, underleased, and badly managed, but its location was perfect. We renovated the lobby, upgraded the compliance systems, and signed several anchor tenants through holding companies. One of those tenants was Shin Meridian Holdings. 3 full floors. On paper, Shin Meridian managed restaurants, real estate, and import logistics. In practice, those offices were the clean nervous system of the Shin family empire. Payroll, legal files, customs documentation, property records, encrypted communications, and every legitimate contract that allowed their darker network to move without attracting immediate attention. Their background investigation on the building reached a layered ownership entity controlled by Beaumont Capital. The Beaumont name meant nothing to them because Junho had never learned my grandfather's full history. During our marriage, he knew him only as James, the stubborn old man whose hospital bills I was paying. I knew exactly which company I was approving when the lease crossed my desk. Marcus watched me read the tenant summary. "Conflict?" he asked. "No." "Personal history?" "Yes." "Should I move it to the committee?" I looked at the proposed terms. Market rate, strong deposit, no special treatment. "Approve it through normal process," I said. "No favours, no penalties." I signed and moved to the next file. I did not build Beaumont Capital to trap Junho. Revenge was never the architecture. I built because my grandfather had protected a foundation long enough for me to decide whether it deserved a future. I built because dozens of tenants trusted us with their businesses. I built because I had learned what happened when I let another person's certainty become louder than my own judgment. The empire came first. His dependence on it came later. But karma does not ask for your blueprint before it walks through the door and begins rearranging the furniture. The annual Lee Sterling Gala was the most important night in the city's business calendar. Every major firm attended. Investors, regulators, developers, political donors, family dynasties, and people whose names never appeared on public invitations. Security checked the guest list twice. Cameras covered the entrance. Deals began over dessert and ended in private elevators before midnight. It was Beaumont Capital's first year with its own table. Not a borrowed chair, not a guest pass. Table 5, 8 seats, centre floor. Our name printed in gold. I wore deep emerald velvet and gold earrings my grandmother would have called too much for an ordinary Tuesday. It was not an ordinary Tuesday. It was the night I stopped being invisible in the rooms that had once trained themselves not to see me. Marcus appeared beside me near the reception bar. "Table 11, he said. I did not look immediately. "Who?" "The Shins." "And?" "Yeon Jisoo is with them." I turned. Jisoo wore silver. She stood beside Mrs. Shin, laughing with 3 developers and a television host. Junho was several feet away speaking to 2 council elders. 4 Shin security men formed a loose perimeter near the wall. Even at a charity gala, his world carried its own weather. He looked almost exactly as I remembered, except the certainty around him seemed heavier, less youthful, more earned and more dangerous. He had not seen me. Jisoo did. Her laugh stopped. For 1 second, surprise stripped every social expression from her face. Then she smiled and crossed the ballroom toward me, not hesitant, decided. The walk of a woman who had already rehearsed the interaction and liked the ending. "Zara." She said my name as though she had discovered an old employee at an exclusive event. "You look well? What brings you here? Are you working with the venue?" The question was quiet enough to sound polite and loud enough for the people nearest us to hear. "I am here with my company. I said. Oh? She tilted her head. You started something? Beaumont Capital Enterprises. Her eyes changed, only slightly, but I saw recognition. Of course, she said. One of those boutique redevelopment firms. That is wonderful. There is room for all kinds of players in this market. She said boutique the way people say temporary. Table 5, I said. Her gaze moved toward the center of the ballroom. Our gold name card was visible from where she stood. Before she could answer, the lights dimmed. The gala host stepped onto the stage. Before dinner, he said, we are recognizing the firm responsible for this year's largest community commercial revitalization project. 3 years ago, Beaumont Capital Enterprises was 6 months from liquidation. Tonight, its holdings exceed $240 million, and more than half of its newest commercial tenants are locally owned businesses. A spotlight moved across the room. It stopped on me. Please welcome Beaumont Capital's controlling owner and chief executive officer, Ms. Zara Beaumont. I walked to the stage. I spoke for 3 minutes about my grandfather, the neighborhoods most investors ignored and the businesses that deserved buildings designed to keep them instead of push them out. I did not mention Junho. I did not mention Jisoo. I did not need to. The truth was standing under a spotlight with my name behind it. When I returned to table 5, Junho was still watching me. He did not smile. He looked like a man who had just discovered that a door he once closed casually now belonged to an entire building he could not enter without permission. Marcus leaned toward me. Your phone, he said. A red regulatory alert filled the screen. An anonymous complaint had been filed with the city's Financial Conduct and Licensing Authority, accusing Beaumont Capital of fraudulent asset valuation, concealed liabilities, and improper financing disclosures. The complaint cited internal deal numbers, acquisition dates, non-public assumptions from our first year, information that could only have come from one external consulting file. Yon Advisory Group. I looked up. Jisoo was standing beside Junho now. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. His attention remained on me, but from a distance the image said exactly what she wanted it to say. She belonged beside him. I was the past. My success had lasted only until someone important challenged it. The complaint was not designed merely to trigger an investigation. It was timed to become public during the gala, in front of the same people whose confidence Beaumont Capital depended on. Within minutes, whispers moved from table to table. A reporter checked her phone. One lender excused himself to make a call. Jisoo had chosen the room as a weapon. She wanted the story to become simple. The waitress rose too fast, reached too high, and was exposed in front of everyone. But she had made one mistake. She still believed I was alone. She did not understand that the woman standing under the chandelier had spent 3 years building documentation as carefully as she built property. She did not know the complaint contained its own trail back to her. And Junho did not yet know that the woman he had divorced for a 90-day game now owned the tower housing the legitimate machinery of his entire family. If you were in that ballroom, your name just announced, your company under attack, and the people who bet against you watching for you to break, would you confront them in public? Or would you smile, collect the evidence, and let them destroy themselves? Leave your answer in the comments. I did not confront anyone. I excused myself and walked to the restroom. I stood at the sink for exactly 4 minutes. I let one tear fall. Not because I wanted Junho back, not because Jisoo stood beside him. Because I had spent 3 years proving that my grandfather's company deserved to live, and someone who had never built anything without inherited access was trying to bury it with stolen information. The anger was clean, white-hot, clarifying. I washed my hands, dried my face, reapplied my lipstick, looked at myself in the mirror until my breathing slowed. Then I called Marcus. Pull every compliance file back to day 1, preserve all consultant access logs, notify outside counsel and our lenders before they hear this from anyone else, already moving. Find the data path. We will. And Marcus? Yes? No defensive press statement tonight. We do not argue in a ballroom. What do? We document. I returned to table 5. Junho stepped into my path before I reached my chair. Up close, the years were more visible. A faint line beside his mouth, a harder stillness in his eyes. Behind him, 2 security men remained several paces away. "Zara," he said. It was the first time I had heard my name in his voice for 3 years. "Move," I said. His gaze flickered. "I did not know." "You did not know many things. About the company, about tonight, about Jisoo. This is not the place." His jaw tightened. The old Junho might have used his presence to hold the space until I answered. This one stepped aside. As I passed, he said quietly, "If someone from my side touched your company, I will find out." I stopped without turning. "Your side already touched my life once," I said. "You called it a game." Then I returned to my table, ordered sparkling water, and remained until the final speech ended. I did not leave early. I would not give Jisoo the image she had paid for. The investigation lasted 11 days. We opened our records before the authority requested them. Every valuation had independent support. Every liability had been disclosed. Every acquisition had a traceable approval chain. On day 3, our attorneys found the breach. An administrator account at Yeon Advisory had reopened Beaumont's archived consulting folder 2 weeks before the gala. The account belonged to Jisoo. She exported internal models, altered several assumptions, then submitted the complaint through an intermediary. The same account had accessed files belonging to 2 other companies in previous years, both small, black-owned firms that later collapsed under anonymous accusations they could not afford to fight. This was not jealousy acting once. It was a method. While our lawyers worked, pressure came from another direction. The Shin Council learned that Beaumont owned their tower. 2 elders wanted Junho to send men to my office, frighten the board, and force a renewal guarantee before the investigation damaged the building's financing. Yoonji told me later what happened in that meeting. Junho placed both hands on the council table and said, "No one approaches Zara. No one follows her. No one speaks to her staff. The first man who uses my name to threaten her answers to me." It did not erase what he had done, but for the first time, he protected my choice instead of replacing it with his own. Mrs. Shin called my private number on day 5. Her voicemail lasted 40 seconds. She suggested I step down temporarily, accept family assistance, and allow more experienced people to stabilize the company. She called my grandfather's legacy something larger than it needs to become. I saved the message. Then I returned to work. On day 11, the authority cleared Beaumont Capital on every allegation. By noon, our legal team filed a 140-page complaint against Yon Advisory Group for theft of confidential information, fraudulent reporting, and interference with regulated business activity. We did not leak rumors. We released facts. 3 referral partners suspended Yon Advisory. The licensing authority froze its operating approval. The 2 previously targeted firms joined the complaint. Jisoo's father resigned as chairman after internal messages showed he had ignored warnings about her access. Within 90 days, Yon Advisory Group dissolved. Jisoo lost her professional license and faced civil judgments large enough to consume most of her family trust. She left the city's business circle she had spent her life believing belonged to her. Karma did not arrive with shouting. It arrived with timestamps. And while that case unfolded, the Shin family's lease renewal landed on my desk. Their agreement expired in 30 days. Because of new compliance requirements, relocating their legal operations, secure servers, and import records would take at least 4 months. A forced move would freeze contracts, expose gaps to regulators, and fracture the respectable surface protecting the rest of their network. They requested a 90-day extension. My signature was the only one that could grant it. I called Junho. He answered on the second ring. "Zara, I need you in my office tomorrow at 9. Bring your attorneys and Eunjae. Is this about the lease?" "It is about the truth." I ended the call. He arrived at 8:55 with 2 attorneys, Eunjae, and 4 security men. Building security allowed only the attorneys and Unjae upstairs. Junho told his men to remain in the lobby. I let him wait 15 minutes. Not cruelty, calibration. I wanted him to understand access as something granted, not assumed. When I crossed the lobby, he stood. The Beaumont name shone in gold behind me. He looked at it, then at me, like a man finally understanding that the woman he had reduced to one role had contained an entire history he never bothered to learn. "Conference room," I said. I did not offer my hand. His attorneys presented the request professionally. 90 days, standard rent, additional security deposit, no special reduction. When they finished, Marcus placed 4 folders on the table. Inside were Jisoo's access logs, the authorities' clearance, the Shin lease, and a dated statement describing the birthday bet and the false reason used for our divorce. I looked directly at Junho. "Did you know she stole Beaumont's information?" "No." "Did you help her file the complaint?" "No." "Did you divorce me because of the bet?" His attorneys became still. "Yes." The words sounded different now. Smaller. Ashamed. "Say what happened." He did. No excuses. No alcohol blamed. No claim that Jisoo manipulated him beyond his control. "I accepted a dare because I believed Zara would come back," he said. "I treated her love as proof that I could hurt her without losing her. I lied about the reason for the divorce. The failure was mine." Yoonjae signed as witness. I slid the lease extension across the table. 90 days, I said. "During that period, your family moves its sensitive operations into a separately compliant structure. No intimidation of Beaumont staff, no hidden pressure through lenders, politicians, or tenants. Break one condition, and the extension ends immediately." Junho signed. Then he looked at me. "Why not remove us now?" "Because I do not use contracts as emotional weapons," I said. "That was your mistake. I will not make it mine." For the first time that morning, he had no answer. As the others left, he remained by the door. "Zara, I am sorry. I believe you regret it. That is not the same thing." "No." "Will it ever be enough?" I closed the folder. "Regret is what you feel. Repair is what you do next." He nodded and left. 3 weeks later, he called at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning. "I have followed Beaumont for 2 years, he said. I thought about calling every month. Everything I imagined saying sounded small beside what you built. And now? Now I understand I threw away the most honest thing in my life because I thought being needed was the same as being loved." I looked through my office windows at the city below. "The night you took the bet," I said, "what did you believe would happen?" "That you would call by day 10. I thought I would wait until day 30, maybe 40, then come get you. I thought I was the thing you could not leave." "You were," I said, "until you forced me to discover I could," he breathed quietly. "The 90 days you gave me were not the 90 days in which I built this entire company," I continued. "They were the 90 days in which I laid its first new foundation. While you waited for me to beg, I renegotiated the debt that kept Beaumont alive. Everything standing now grew from the time you expected me to spend on my knees." "I hear you. Do not just hear me. Live differently. Can I take you to dinner?" "Before I tell you my answer, tell me yours. If someone humiliated you, changed, accepted the consequences and came back without demanding forgiveness, would you give them one chance to prove it, or would you close the door forever? Leave your answer below." "Not yet," I told him. He did not argue. "Okay." It was not a promise. It was not forgiveness. It was a boundary. For 6 months he respected it. He moved the Shin operations before the extension expired. He testified fully in the case against Jisoo, even though the statement embarrassed his family. He removed the 2 council elders who had proposed threatening Beaumont. He created a written rule forbidding the network from using spouses or relatives as leverage in internal disputes. Most importantly, he did these things without sending me reports about his progress. He stopped performing change for access to me. He simply changed. Mrs. Shin sent a handwritten apology. No offer of money. No advice. She admitted she had measured my worth by proximity to her son because she could not imagine a woman possessing power that did not come through a man. I kept the letter in a drawer beside Jisoo's old sweetie message, not as trophies, as records of what silence can become when people mistake it for surrender. 7 months after the conference room meeting, I called Jun-ho. "One dinner," I said. "No security at the table, no private room, no promises." He arrived early at the same late-night diner where he once gave me a white carnation. He did not bring flowers. That mattered. Flowers would have tried to recreate the past. He understood we could not return there. We spoke for 3 hours, not about fate, not about how much he missed me, about accountability, fear, power, and the kind of man he had been when he believed love made consequences optional. I did not forgive him that night, but I agreed to a second dinner. A year later, we were not remarried. There was no ring and no dramatic announcement. We were building something slower, with separate homes, clear boundaries, and no closed rooms I was expected not to understand. He attended Beaumont events as my guest. I attended Shin family dinners only when I chose. When council business affected legitimate tenants, he explained it instead of telling me I would not understand. Trust did not return like lightning. It returned like construction, inspected, reinforced, tested before anyone was allowed to call it safe, and if it had failed, I would have walked away again. That was the difference. I no longer stayed because I feared losing him. I stayed only while the relationship deserved me. There was one more consequence nobody at the birthday table had considered. When the investigation became public, the 2 business owners Jisoo had targeted before me were invited to join a recovery fund created by Beaumont Capital. We covered their forensic accounting costs, helped one reopen under a new structure, and placed the other inside one of our renovated properties at reduced rent for 18 months. I did not do it to make myself look generous. I did it because power means very little if all it does is protect the person who finally obtains it. At the fund's first meeting, one of the women held my hand and said, "I thought losing meant they were right about me." I understood that sentence too well. "No," I told her. "It meant they had more resources than you did at the time. That is not the same as being right." That became part of Beaumont's mission. Every year, a percentage of our profits went toward legal and financial defense for small companies facing predatory complaints. The attack meant to erase my grandfather's company, forced us to decide what kind of empire we wanted to become. We chose one that opened doors for others after surviving the people who tried to close them. That decision mattered to me more than any magazine cover, because rebuilding yourself is powerful, but using what you built to keep someone else from being buried is how survival becomes legacy. The woman who left the apartment with one bag, $1,900, and a phone number did not inherit a finished empire. She inherited debt, damaged buildings, and a name almost erased. Then she built. The hidden identity was not that I had secretly been rich. It was that I had always possessed the judgment, endurance, and vision people refused to notice while I carried plates. The tower was evidence, not the transformation. The transformation happened the moment I stopped allowing someone else's certainty to speak louder than my own. My grandfather protected the foundation. I rebuilt the company. My team expanded it. And the man who once believed 90 days would prove I needed him spent 90 days asking the woman he underestimated for time. That is what karma looked like in my story. Not violence, not revenge for spectacle. A signed document, a protected boundary, a lobby where he had to wait, a relationship that could continue only after power stopped being confused with love. So remember this: the people who discard you are not defining your value. They are revealing the limit of their vision. Build inside the silence they hand you. Build with discipline, not destruction. And when your moment comes, do not waste it begging them to admit they were wrong. Let the evidence speak, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do to someone who underestimated you is not destroy them. It is to make them sit in your lobby beneath the name you rebuilt, waiting for you to decide whether you have time. And then, whether you open the door or leave it closed, make certain the choice is finally yours.